Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's live stream on the Lobby USA, which was a 2018 documentary put out by Al Jazeera. It was interestingly originally suppressed as a documentary. Somehow, Israel, and when I say somehow, it's because of developing ties between Israel and Qatar, Israel and the UAE, Israel and Saudi Arabia. Remember that these Arab countries, they say one thing to their population, and behind closed doors, they say something else to Israel. And somehow Israel was able to pressure Qatar not to broadcast this four-part documentary. Thankfully, I think it was leaked. I'm not sure if it was leaked to the Electronic Intifada or by the Electronic Intifada or other people related to them, but it's been leaked and now it's available, and that's how we were able to watch it to prepare for today's live stream. Now, if you watch the introduction to the first episode, it alludes to the fact that there was an original lobby series which led to the firing of somebody, which is great. And we are going to cover that. I don't know that we'll cover it on our next stream, but I will go back to that series. But what it did was it emboldened Al Jazeera, I think, to create this series, which had a a young British man effectively infiltrate Israel, which the irony, the sort of delicious justice related to this, that Israel, who's so busy infiltrating all these other organizations, causing problems, is itself infiltrated. And hearing them brag about certain things was particularly gratifying, knowing that all of them would be put on camera, their names, their affiliations, and their careless remarks. I really appreciated that. There are several themes here, and I don't, obviously, as we do with all our reviews, we don't have time to get into everything. Just like when I do book reviews, I can't get into everything that the book covers. When I do documentary reviews, I can't get into everything the documentary covers. But I think the main thing that we have to look at here is BDS. So if you don't know what BDS is, it's boycott, divestment, and sanction. And it's a movement, a grassroots movement that was inspired by what happened in South Africa with apartheid and a creation of economic and moral separation from that government until it could bear it no longer. Keep in mind that as long as they had the UK and America on their side, South Africa was happy to take the world's anger, name calling, whatever you want to say. And that's exactly what's going on with Israel now. Israel doesn't care if the entire world is against it if they have the US on their side. So part of why they're alarmed about BDS is because they know that a form of BDS worked against South Africa and took down what was assumed to be an impenetrable government. And so Israel considers itself impenetrable, inevitable, sort of Thanos of the Middle East. And so they think nothing can take them down. But the reality is, it's so fraught with internal pressures that they don't want to admit, as well as external pressures, that Israel has never been in more danger of collapse than at the present moment. So they will say externally BDS is nothing, it's astroturf, it's not a big deal. When it's clear, even as this documentary progresses, even in 2018, that BDS was working. And the fact that Israel put so much time, money, resources, brains into trying to deal with BDS should indicate to you that BDS is an enormous existential threat for Israel. Because if Israel gets cut off economically and morally, it cannot be this pretense that it puts itself forward as. It will just have to face the music. And that's why in episode 1, it leads with the desire for information superiority, which is led in part by many different organizations, but including the Israel Project, which is abbreviated as TIP, the Israel Project. And I did a review of Frank Luntz's 2009 Global Language Dictionary for the Israel Project. If I remember, I'll put a link in the description and a card for it after the stream the next couple days. But that document was leaked. It wasn't meant to be shared externally because it shows all of these different strategies for engaging in Hasbra, lying, covering up. They don't call it lying, they call it words that work, but they're effectively lying about what's going on. And part of those lies include saying that BDS is a hate group. So we saw towards the end of episode 4 these astroturfed Israel supporters who responded very limply when asked, "What is BDS?" And the lady goes, "A hate group, hate organization." And no voices from the people who were effectively paid to come protest, except these were right-wing protesters. And the BDS protesters, students, I think students for Justice in Palestine, so SJP students at the university, simply turned their backs and refused to engage them. These are terrorists. These are Hamas. These are the hate groups. They've got a bunch of Jews or Jew supporters there. This would be a great opportunity to say horrible anti-Semitic things. And yet they don't. They just turn their backs and they stand in solidarity with the Palestinians. And so what's interesting is episode 1 goes on to feature different pro-Israeli speakers, advocates, saying that the college campuses are just a sideshow. They're not really that important. What really is important is legislation, APAC, etc. And to an extent, that's true. But where it is really important is in the staged protests and then the media coverage that they get from that. So, very famously, I think it was either at the end of episode 1 or the beginning of episode 2, we get a feature on the University of California at Davis where they were about to pass a BDS resolution in the student government. And keep in mind, the student government doesn't have the ability to make changes for the university. Effectively, depending on a university's charter, all the student government can do is make recommendations. The board of trustees then have to do something with the student government resolutions. And if the students can make enough of a press, potentially the board of trustees have to do something. And some universities have acted to accept BDS divestment recommendations from student bodies. So it has worked. What happened at Davis was that some people from one of these different, and keep in mind, there's the David Project, Stand With Us, APAC, Canary Mission, Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, i.e., the Foundation for the Defense of Israel. All these fake organizations, fake in the sense of they're just basically saying we're here to support Israel unconditionally, no matter what. Let's kill as many babies as possible. And so they staged a walkout with their own people, and as they were walking out, some people were shouting Allahu Akbar or whatever, or get out. And so the news story became Jewish students forced out of student government resolution. When the reality is they're the ones who walked out, but they managed to pitch the story in such a way. And that was one of the things that they're doing, this information superiority, I would say headline warfare. They have a bunch of smart people crafting headlines because most people only read headlines. They don't read the story. So if the headline is carefully crafted enough, the narrative can be BDS is a hate group. These people supporting Palestinians are supporting terrorists. They want child suicide bombers, all of those things. And in fact, what happens after this walkout, I think the next day, there are swastikas painted. Now, if you know anything about the history of Mossad, going back to the early days of Israel, you'll know that there are false flag events created by Mossad in order to frighten Jews. But often it's sometimes done by themselves. So Iraqi Jews, for example, Avi Shlaim talks about this. Numerous other people talk about the fact that Iraqi Jews didn't want to leave Iraq. And the displaced persons after World War II who were in and around Europe, they either wanted to settle in America or in Canada or in some other parts, UK, some other part of Europe. They had no wishes to go to Palestine. And I've reviewed other books and documentaries in which at the time, Haganah forces would bully people, take their ration cards, socially isolate them to try to force them to come to Palestine. Remember, this is supposed to be a haven for Jews, but if you don't like it, we're going to force you to go. I don't know. Could that be considered anti-Semitic? So the Iraqi Jews were integrated with the Iraqi population, had been there for centuries, and they didn't want to go. They felt Iraqi. So Mossad came in, disrupted the population, placed bombs in synagogues, created friction such that many Iraqi Jews end up emigrating. So the same thing here. And in fact, one of the pro-Israeli activists says, we don't even think it was students who painted the swastikas. Surely not. They were likely to be pro-Israeli advocates who did it themselves. And we see this over and over. We've seen it in New York where people dressed up with the keffiyeh. They give the special Roman salute of the 1930s, and turns out they were Jewish. Or this lady, I think she owned a deli. She said that she received a bunch of anti-Semitic, hatred, and turns out she did it to herself. So this would be nothing new. These swastikas are admitted by the lady who led the pro-Israel protest. She said, "We don't even think students did it." So clearly the students didn't, but they were happy to have it pinned on them. And in all likelihood, they probably did it themselves. That's what happens. So they're able to then create a narrative of so-called Jewish hate, where distracting from the fact that this isn't about Jewish hate. This is about the murder of babies. And that's what many people are opposed to. And that's what goes on all the time. And I say murder of babies, obviously there's much more that goes on than that, but it's much easier to just focus on that and remind people that when you support Israel, you support the murder of babies. So the person who appears in when I say she appears, her face and her voice appears in every episode of the documentary is Sema Valeran Gil. And this person has clearly worked for the intelligence forces of Israel. And one of her quotes is, "Ambiguity is part of our guidelines." Ambiguity is part of our guidelines. Well, why? Because you're lying. As I've said before, truth does not need protection. Lies need protection. And the lies of Israel need protection through ambiguity, through these attacks. They are, all of these different groups are foreign entities spying on US citizens under the guise of uncovering anti Semitism. But if it were any other country, there would be a public outcry. But because it's Israel, you're not allowed to say anything. And so what I came to understand in watching this documentary more than anything is that um, two things. Sorry, two things. First is that the trend of conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism is not something that's happened in the last couple of years. It was already, they were mentioning it back in 2018. So they wanted to create an expanded definition of anti-Semitism. What was interesting was one of the people said, one of the pro-Israel people said, anti-Semitism as a smear is not what it used to be. And I laughed. I paused the documentary and I wrote down, because of you. This is the classic boy who cried wolf scenario. If you cry anti-Semitism for everything, at some point it will lose any kind of meaning, if it ever really had any meaning. That's a question maybe for another time. But it then loses any kind of meaning so that people become numb to it. So then you're not able to use it anymore. When you use it as a weapon over and over and over, people just get numb to it. Say, okay, well, fine, I'm an anti-Semite, whatever that means. The second is that Israel does take BDS very seriously. That's why they're spending all of these time, resources, and brains on trying to suppress it. If it wasn't effective, if it wasn't a major way to take on Israel in an asymmetric way, because Israel on the battlefield possesses unbelievable superiority. They're fighting unarmed men, women, and children. And the forces that are armed are in tunnels with homemade rockets, which are incredibly effective, blown up a bunch of the number of Israel isn't going to tell you how many of their tanks have been blown up, but an unbelievable amount. I mean, kudos to Hamas for taking the battle to people who have far superior weaponry. They've done a lot with a little. So Hamas, as fighters, they've done an amazing job, and they have to be commended for that. But on the battlefield, outside of those, they just bomb people in their tents, they kill children. There's no way for people to respond. But in BDS, where we are, we can choose not to buy this Israeli product. We can ask store owners not to carry Israeli products. We can encourage people to have more awareness of things. Israel cannot fight this. They can't fight all of us at the same time. And even if they do, you can try to put yourself into situations where you either own your own business or you put yourself in situations that they can't threaten you. So one of the ways that they get a lot of people is through this Canary Mission. So Canary Mission has a website. They'll name and shame you. So if I was a student, I might be a target of Canary Mission. Who knows? Maybe I am a target of Canary Mission. I don't care. I would be proud to be a target potentially. So Adam Milstein, who is the guy who created the Canary Mission, will create basically a website of you, a web page, your name, quotes, organizations you're involved with, basically saying don't hire this person. And they'll assign people to come track you down at your workplace and get you fired. And that's a real possibility. And so I would encourage people, consider building your own business, consider working with clients who don't care and who are willing to withstand any kind of pressure of being called whatever name they want to be called, because that's really what it comes down to: is can you resist the information warfare of Israel? So if the Palestinians are able in their tents and in their tunnels to resist actual deadly weapons, it is a minimum expectation for those of us who support the Palestinians to be able to withstand name calling, to be able to withstand bullying on social media, to be able to withstand people trying to get us fired. So you have to do what you need to do to make sure that you aren't subject to their tactics. Otherwise, you will get shut up by them. You will be told by your employer, you're not allowed to say this anymore. So buy yourself some freedom by putting yourself into a position where you don't have to make those choices. I have to shut up about Palestine because I don't want to lose my job. Obviously, you have responsibilities to your family. I'm not telling you lose your job and stop supporting your family. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying put yourself into a position where you're more resilient and you have more opportunities and you have more options. But if you want to fight against Israel using BDS, you can do this in a nonviolent manner, in a way that really hurts Israel financially and morally and reputationally. You can, in a sense, do more damage than you could ever do by throwing a stone, which in a sense is not our duty anyway. Throwing stones is the job of Palestinians. It's their land. It's an expression of sumud, which is appropriate to them. It's not so appropriate for me, not as someone who holds the land, not as someone who lives on the land, to do that. But it is appropriate for me to stand in solidarity with the Palestinians in other ways. And this is one small way we can do it. It's a small, but I think powerful and impactful way. Something else I learned about in the documentary is that these same groups create basically fake Facebook engagement through related groups. So one of the groups was called Soul Mamas, and it would, like, here's a cup of happiness for the day, but one out of every four posts would be related to Israel. So there'd be a pink, I don't know, a pink fighter jet for breast cancer awareness or something. I mean, just sort of crazy links. But I think that I think it's fascinating that Israel has managed to go to such extents that they're willing to basically create fake Facebook groups and then post, recipes, funny cat videos, and then stand with Israel. But very subtly put in there. That's how much work, how much money, and ironically, it's all our money. So the US sends all this money to Israel. Israel then spends this money to gaslight and brainwash Americans. So we are paying money to brainwash ourselves. And, you know, think about that. Think about what that implies. So something else was, there is an Apac exclusion. So it was clear that Israel was taking lawmakers and their families on expensive $20,000 holidays to Israel. And a law passed in Congress which forbade this, but there was an exclusion put into the bill that if the trip is educational and connected to a charity, it's exempt. And everyone widely calls this the APAC exemption, because that's what it does. So they take these people to sunny beaches near Tel Aviv. They don't take them to the occupied territories. They don't let them speak to a Palestinian. They don't take them on the apartheid roads. They don't let them speak to anyone anywhere else. And the thing is, all of this stuff is widely available. I did not use my my press card. I didn't use any press contacts when I visited Palestine for the first time. There are plenty of organizations who are interested in working for peace, honest Jews and Palestinians working together. I was able to go on these tours and meet these people. I had a Palestinian driver and a Orthodox Jewish guide, and we went down to the Erez crossing and we talked to Palestinians, and we went to a settlement and we talked to Israelis. There are people who are willing to let you hear both sides and let you decide for yourself. It's not that hard to search out. If I could do it by a simple Google search and making some phone calls and going, anyone else can do it as well. So it's not something secretive. But that's not what happens on these junkets for these US congressmen. They're flown over. They're not allowed to see any Palestinians. They're told all these sob stories. They're probably now taken. Everyone does the Kibbutz Berry, Auschwitz tour, where they go and say, oh, here's this crib with this fake blood in it. Here's this. And they don't mention, we blew up all these buildings ourselves. You think Hamas has any tank rounds? Do you think Hamas has any Apache helicopters? How did these places get blown up? Wasn't by Hamas, was by us. But the narrative is, oh, poor us, this is what happened. Playing the victim card, which they have done so well for many, many centuries. And they're continuing. It's a very familiar script for them. They're doing it here. So, as I say, I cannot believe, first of all, that this documentary got made, especially after they had a successful first documentary. And then I can't believe that Israel managed to get it suppressed by Al Jazeera, and then it eventually got leaked. But it was very good reporting, very well produced, and a very good, I would say, 3 hours of your time. I think if you add up all four parts, it probably adds up to 3 or maybe 3.5 hours, but it's well worth your time. All right, I'll be quiet for a moment and head into the chat. The Israeli government was more worried about BDS than Antifa or BLM. Yeah, that's interesting. Didymus, one of the things in episode 4 that was mentioned is the desire to co-opt the Black community, whether that's Black South Africans, to bring them to Israel and brainwash them and say, don't use apartheid in my name, or whether it's Black Lives Matter activists, and Black Lives Matter is a problematic organization on its own, but the point is they're trying to co-opt them and make them pro-Israel. So you have to hand it to the lobby. They are smart, resourceful, forward-thinking people, and that's why it's going to require at least that much from the other side to combat them. But this is a forum in which we're fighting with somewhat equal weapons. They may have fancy cameras and an entire team of researchers, but it's still the same internet. And it's a question of what you're willing to put up with. Are you willing to be cyberbullied? Are you willing to be called names? Are you willing to be blacklisted from jobs? If you're willing to put up with all of that, then they don't really have anything on you. Now, it's where they can get into other stuff, where they were attacking, trying to destroy marriages. There was a professor that talks about the fact that someone who was clearly working for the Israel Project or one of these other groups, Stand With Us, tried to effectively break up his marriage and accuse him of sexual harassment and try and tie it to Palestine. So obviously there's an extreme version of that, but it's a question of what you're willing to put up with in order to represent the Palestinians. Didymus, USA. Oh, you're saying Israel and USA are the same thing. Yep, that's true. Platform engineering. Love you. Love you too. Didymus, they always send big hordes of anti-jihad accounts into far-right spaces. Yeah, it's strange how that happens. What a shocker. So, I know sometimes we're watching shorter documentaries. I know when we did My Neighborhood, it was only a 25-minute documentary, but strangely enough, not so many views for that. But I do a longer documentary and we get way more views. So one of the documentaries that has gotten the most views, the film clubs, I think that's gotten the most views, is the 2025 documentary by Louis Theroux, The Settlers. Part of that is name recognition. It's gotten a lot of press, so a lot of people are searching on YouTube for it, then they find my content about it, and then they get interested. But some of the other work that we've been doing hasn't been as popular, and I'm okay with that. That's what's nice about the stream is this is here for you, whether you watch the documentary before this discussion or you come to it after, or you watch it and I inspire you to go watch the documentary. The point is this is here as a collection of comments so that after the stream is over, you can put stuff in the comments, resources, and we can continue the conversation and continue to educate each other. And that's the hope of all these film clubs. It hopefully, I know that what I'm doing on the book side can be daunting for people. There's no way for them to keep up. There's too many books. I get that. What I'm hoping with Film Club is to give people a feeling that they can keep up. I can watch a documentary a week. I can educate myself 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week at minimum. And so I've tried to set that as a standard for all of us, that if we can watch one documentary a week, it would take years before we watch all the documentaries we need to, but it will brick by brick build up our education and our knowledge so that when we're confronted, we have answers. We don't just have emotion and anger and frustration that we lead with, which all of those are valid and important, but they're not going to win us conversations. They're not going to win us debates. We have to have facts and we have to have a depth of understanding about everything in order to do that. And these documentaries can help us with that. Doesn't mean they're going to deliver it on their own, but they can obviously set up a framework for us to do more study. And then you can move forward when you're having conversations with people, hopefully in a thoughtful, engaging, civil way to get your points across for the Palestinian people. And as I say, for the babies that have been murdered, that will be murdered today, that will be murdered in the future, that you have done something small. We have done something small on their behalf, and we didn't stay silent as the murders were happening. That's the sort of smallest moral burden that we can carry on behalf of them, to remember them, to honor their memory in some way. Are there any questions from the chat? Any other reflections about the documentary? Any other questions about the Israel project, the lobby, APAC, Canary mission? Otherwise, we will wrap up today's stream. All right. Well, thank you very much for stopping by. As I say, keep the conversation going in the comment section, and feel free to point us towards other resources or recommend other documentaries you'd like to see covered. As I said, we'll do the original portion, not the original portion, the documentary that inspired this one. So it was, I think, the Lobby UK. I don't think it was called the Lobby UK at the time. It was just called the Lobby, and then inspired the Lobby USA. So we'll go back and cover that. I can't promise we'll do that next week because this is a long one. I'm going to probably go for a shorter one for next week's stream, but we will do that soon, probably in the next 5 or 6 weeks. Antonio, thanks for the info. God bless. God bless you too. I do not have any questions. Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you next time.